a 14th century German kitchen, I believe. It's out there on the
All
internet.
right. So this is the porridge class. It is, what's the title again?
What's in your porridge? Well, that's the title of the article that I ended up writing. I don't know what we called the class. Porridge.
Okay. We have kasha, buckwheat groats, all up a little bit. It's the grains are kind of separate. They're not too gloopy, with a little homemade yogurt to go with it, because that's the soured milk product I had. What we have here is, okay, so yesterday I went and made some corned beef. Yes, I know it's lit.
Hold them up just a little higher.
Hold them up a little higher. I had made corned beef. If I tip it over too much more, it'll get on the keyboard.
Don't pour the pottage out on your keyboard. That would be bad.
So I had about 2 quarts of, about 2 quarts of stock left from the corned beef, which I'd rinsed, and it wasn't that salty. So I figured, pour in a cup of rice, short grain rice. That'll make it like gruel. It'll be nice and liquid. No, it firmed up. I put some more water into this morning, and it's still plenty gloopy.
And it said, "I have a lot of gloop."
I have a lot of gloop.
It expands. It's true.
How does it taste?
It tastes delicious. It's beefy and soupy, and I almost wish it were cold here today, because it would be perfect for your weather, wouldn't it?
I gotcha cold weather. And it was 80 to here a Saturday, and it will be 24 here tonight. Which is why
people get sick.
This is why I left my house with no power, because it was going to get super cold tonight. Plus, I had 3 classes to teach and no internet. So I have a few things to show and tell, and then this is set up to be a round table. So hopefully we'll get some interesting discussion about porridge. It's a simple topic, but so deep. And I have let me share my screen. That's not it. Hold on. Let me pull it up, and then I can share it. Oh, I hope this works. I've got this as a, you know what? Let me throw this up on my Google Classroom, because I know it will go from here. Give me just a second. I'll upload this. Talk amongst yourselves. What's your favorite porridge grain? There you go. I'll throw out a question for you.
Well, oats are the go-to.
I know, but for me, it's barley. Which reminds me, someday I have to get brave enough to go to the Asian market and see if they have more rolled barley.
Barley. I agree, barley, which I misspelled wildly in the chat.
No, you come visit me again. We've got the Korean market down the block.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah, they've got a lot of barley things there, as well as the rice and the millet. They've got millet. They've got hulled millet, which is interesting. And that was polenta before maize corn.
It's left. They're so tiny.
Koreans drink barley tea also.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's delicious.
Oh, that Japanese toasted barley tea.
Yeah, mugicha. It's very good. It's very delicious.
Okay. All right. So in doing research on porridge, I found, to my surprise, that there is such a thing as porridge art. There's a whole subgenre of porridge art. Who knew? It's out there. So I've got a few pictures, and I'm continuing to collect pictures of porridge. I think it's a fascinating topic. It's such an ubiquitous food, and I'm going to talk about that in just a little bit, but I wanted to show you a few pictures that I've collected. Here we've got from Luttrell Salter, 1340, we've got a servant serving bowls at a feast, and I mean, who knows? It could be soup, it could be anything, but we're going to assume for the purposes of our discussion that that's porridge. I love this painting of the Madonna and Child with milk soup from 1520. And so we've got, this is a kind of painting that would have been reproduced a lot in a workshop. It was a popular one to have hanging in your house. So a lot of different artists would work on producing one of these. There is allegory present in the picture with the Christ child having his own spoon and being able to feed himself and provide sustenance. And there's a whole story behind that. But what I'm concerned with is what's in the bowl, and it says milk soup. I'd be willing to bet there's some bread in that milk soup, and it's just a little milk porridge. My mother grew up in the Midwest, and one of her favorite comfort foods was a bowl of milk with a piece of white bread and sugar sprinkled over the top of the white bread, eaten with a spoon out of the bowl. So that's what I imagine. The Madonna is feeding the Christ child here is my mom's favorite comfort food, and it's probably pretty close, maybe without the sugar, but still, basically that kind of
I
pap.
don't know, medieval and, and luxury, I would say there should be sugar in it.
Yeah,
In the
little
foreground, we see the bread, a little loaf of bread and an apple. So
and there's something in there. There's definitely something in the milk, and I'm guessing that's little chunks of bread that she's dipped in there, and then pap, you're feeding that to a baby. Here we have a piece of stained glass that's in the V&A collection. This is the biblical story of Jacob and Esau with the bowl of pottage, and Esau gives up his birthright in exchange for a bowl of pottage. And there's a lot of different translations that talk about what's in the pottage. Red lentils seems to be one of the favorite ideas behind that. So it could be any kind of porridge or stew. But it's a beautiful stained glass with a bowl of pottage in the middle of it. Here we have the peasant wedding, really common photo. Most of them have seen it, and this is a really poor resolution, so I'm going to go ahead and look at this detail of it. And so we can see here that they are serving bowls of porridge as the wedding feast. In fact, if you look at the table, what's on the table is bread, porridge, and ale. And there's a big sheaf, well, I cropped them out, but there's two big sheaves of wheat on the wall behind them. So this is clearly in the fall. This is happening with the wheat harvest that's come in. And you can tell that it's kind of thick because look at this fellow. He's got this bowl of it and he's kind of tipping it and it's not pouring out. And this little person down here is getting the last, he's licking the bowl and getting the last of it. So we've got main course. Everybody at this wedding is getting served a big bowl of porridge.
What's in the white bowls, do you think?
Oh, maybe a milk leach, a thickened milk. It might be a rice porridge. It might be no meat. It may be the difference between some meat-free ones if they had some clergy that was observing a Lent, a fast that wasn't being observed by everybody else there. I mean, I'm guessing, but this is a wonderful painting. And look at the porridge in these people's bowls. Looks a lot like the kasha groats that Dame Selene was showing us. Not creamy, not soupy or gloopy, quite distinctively still groats of grain. And it looks like she has a spoon. He's just going for it. He's just dipping it with his hands, right? And so they're eating porridge. It was a very common food that lots of people ate. I love this painting. We're getting a little out of period here, but I just love her clothes, the colors, the big pottage that she's eating her porridge out of. It looks like she just picked it right up off of the side of the fire and she's eating porridge out of her pot. And this was the first one I found when I started looking for porridge art, and this one popped up and I went, wait, what? This is an etching from, I think, around 1640. It's not really dated, but that's when these guys worked together. And again, you've got the loaf of bread and perhaps maybe a little cheese to the side of that, but a bowl of porridge, probably some ale and some bread. So very grain-based diet. This is peas porridge, and this is peas porridge pot, peas porridge cold, peas porridge in the pot, 9 days old. Probably has Elizabethan or 16th century origins in that particular rhyme. This is some peas porridge that I made, and the stuff in the bowl is cold and sliced. So when we're talking about cold peas porridge, that's what we're looking at, is something that then is standing, right? When the recipes say, and make it standing, where it has its own texture and it's standing on its own. And peas porridge will definitely do that when it has been allowed to sit and get cold. Now, there's no grains in this porridge. This is all a pea-based porridge. but those kind of things did. And this was my breakfast this morning. This is the one photo I got Selene before my power went out. And I sent this to you. This is from the former curry. It's called Gruel of Almonds. And it is oatmeal, almond milk, saffron, and salt. No
Look at
sugar.
the saffron threads. Very
Decadent.
luxurious.
I mean, when I use saffron, baby, I don't fool around. I want to know it's in there, you know. And it was delicious. It was no sweet. Usually, I don't eat my oatmeal without either at least fruit in it. I usually go for a more sweet oatmeal. This was savory and just delicious. I loved it. And it's a very simple gruel of almonds from the form of curry. So in this Lenten season, this might be what's in your porridge bowl.
Mm. So it's actually oatmeal and almonds. It's not just almonds itself.
Almond milk. It specifically calls for almond milk and oatmeal. And
Oh, cool.
or no, actually, I take that back. Well, hold on. Let me find it. I'll find it. I'll put it up here. Down here in the recipes. There it is. Take almonds, blanched, brave him up with oatmeal, draw him up with water, and cast thereon saffron and salt. So there could be some almond nut meat in it. It doesn't say to strain it. So it says to take it up with water, but it doesn't say to strain the oatmeal out, the almonds out. So I just made it with straight almond milk, but I think you could get away with adding ground almonds to this and cooking it and having a really thick porridge with something more than just the oatmeal.
That picture is just wonderful.
Which
It's
one?
really beautiful. The one of your breakfast.
Oh, with the beautiful salmon, the saffron threads on it. Yeah, I thought that was really pretty. It came out just beautiful too. So in the other research that I have found, we've got one archaeologist talking about how the porridge started the Neanderthal revolution by allowing hunter-gatherer groups to feed babies on food before they would normally be allowed to nurse longer. Being able to feed them food allowed them to have more children, so it created a population explosion. So this is his work. You can have groats, which are unprocessed oat or wheat kernels, just the whole kernel, probably what those people were eating in the porridge eaters. Gruel, which is a thin porridge-like mixture boiled with milk or water. Lit, which is Gaelic for porridge, which has the same background as the other words for porridge and pulse and poultice and pult. So in Irish, it might be litiu or linton or lilth. You've got peas porridge, usually from England and Scotland. Porridge, heated or ground, crushed, chopped starchy plants like a grain in milk or water. Pottage usually has vegetables, grains, and if available, meat or fish in them. And people would grow pottage gardens to be able to what they needed in the plant, in the pot. Pap is soft or semi-liquid food, usually fed to babies or invalids. And stirabout is an Irish term for grains stirred into hot liquid. And of the grains that I found used around the world, you've got barley, buckwheat, corn, millet, oats, rice, rye, sorghum, spelt, triticale, wheat, and then also almonds, flaxseed, peas, potatoes, quinoa, thampa, and yams, all from different places around the world that might be in your porridge. So depending on your persona, if you were from, more Tibetan area, you might be mixing your grain flour, barley flour with pea and butter to make your porridge. Or if you're from Africa, it might be yams. Or if you have a New World persona, it might be quinoa or potatoes that could be used in your porridge.
So, Christianna, you've found almonds, but no other nuts?
So I started this research falling down a very deep rabbit hole. And I told Selene I had a bunch of other stuff this week and I didn't need to take on any more, but I did. And I stopped myself short I found myself wondering one day, so if this one is ground almonds and oatmeal, I wonder if other cultures would make their porridges with ground nuts, because I know that in the Middle East they use ground walnuts, for example, to make things like garlic jants and other sauces. And that's where I stopped myself and said, I don't need to go down that rabbit hole that deeply. It's fascinating. I do think other nuts would probably be used. I think in Africa you find instances of you using ground nuts and yams together and things like that. But I stopped myself short of diving into that direction with it. I think it's valid. It's a great question, but I didn't have time this week to go down that direction. If anybody knows of an example, is Urta team, is she in this class or she goes someplace else? She might have an example of a Middle Eastern recipe that would be using something like pistachios or walnuts or.
I don't see her. Yeah.
Good question. One I asked myself. Here's the biblical passage for Esau. When Jacob was cooking stew, Esau came in from the field and he was exhausted. And Esau said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of that red stew, for I am exhausted." Jacob said, "Sell me your birthright now." Esau said, "I'm about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me?" Jacob said, "Swear to me now." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate some and drank and rose and went on his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. That's from Genesis 25, 29, 34.
Little brothers are big meanies.
Yes.
Little brothers.
Got the brains.
Terrible.
We've got archaeological finds from a 10th century Gotland woman's grave that included porridge remains. An analysis of that showed that it contained barley and pea with milk fats, most likely from sheep. And the Breton law from the 7th century talks about the feeding of fostered children. The children of the inferior grades are fed to bare sufficiency of stirabout made of oatmeal on buttermilk or water, and it is taken with stale butter. Sons of the chieftain grades are fed to satiety on stirabout made of barley meal upon new milk, taken with fresh butter. Sons of kings are fed on stirabout made of wheaten meal upon new milk, taken with honey. That's kind of an interesting little look into, depending on where your socioeconomic class was, the better your breakfast, the better your porridge was going to be. What else have I got here? I also looked really deeply at the Tudor garden part of the Tudor monastery farm program that was done by Ruth Goodman and a bunch of other anthropologists in England, because they are living on a monastery farm and that farm is producing, they live there for a year. And she goes through and talks about what's available in the garden during the whole year and how your porridge changed seasonally based on what was coming out of the garden. So you'd have a lot of dried peas and beans in the wintertime, but by the time you got to the spring, the peas and beans would be going away and you wouldn't have that. So you'd have pottage. It would be there all the time, but the contents would be different. You'd have the dish, but it's because you were eating pottage in spring and in fall doesn't mean that the contents of those dishes would be the same. Bridget, thank you. Hello, good to see you, Mistress Bridget. There's a Spanish pottage which is made with ground toasted hazelnuts and almonds, cooked with chicken broth and sugar. That sounds good.
Ooh,
The
that does
name of the recipe is Avena. Tongue twisted tonight, but it translates as hazelnut dish. So perhaps the hazelnuts don't dominate. It doesn't say what the proportion is.
And do you remember from doing that translation whether they strain the nuts out of that or not?
Not oh yes, they do. It said, I'm looking at it now. Take hazelnuts, which are toasted and blanched and peeled, and almonds, which are toasted and peeled and blanched, grind them in a mortar, blah, blah, blah. Blend it with hen's broth and then strain it through a woolen cloth and then set it to cook and add a good quantity of sugar.
So you're making
some
a
rose water.
combination hazelnut almond milk sounds like.
Yes, and it says stir it constantly with a stick until it is well cooked and becomes very thick. And then test to see if it tastes of rose water.
So-
Aha! A spurtle. Spurtles are Spanish too.
Oh, and there it is. Where did you get spurtle out of that?
Stir it with a stick.
Oh, and stir it with a stick. You're right. You're right.
That's a stick.
That's a stick. You're right. That's a spurtle. A spurtle is a very handy tool.
It is.
It's true.
I've got a myrtle
So there
spurtle.
we go. So there's a Spanish version that includes hazelnuts. So yes, I'd be willing to bet that nuts. I mean, basically, it's what's growing. So is it a grain? Is it vegetables? Is it meats? Is it nuts? I am not having any connectivity issues, so I'm gonna say it's probably on your end.
Yeah, there's an almond one right after it. I, of course, I had to flip open Bridget's translation. The next one was a pottage, which is called almond dish. So
There you go.
that answers Renata's question as
With
well.
egg yolks and almonds, meat broth. Strain it so that it will be quite thick with the eggs. Put this sauce on a pot. Put a little bit of sour stuff in the pot. Sour stuff. Wonder if that's like a sour orange juice maybe, or bear juice. And sugar and whole cinnamon and a little ginger, and cook it and sample it that it is sour and sweet in good fashion. Huh. That's interesting.
Wow, sounds good too.
That does sound good. Yeah, and I'm a fan. I like pottage. I like oatmeal. I like soups. I like peas porridge. I mean, all of those are can be very, very tasty. And so, gosh, it was so cold this morning, and the winds were whipping so hard
Oh, you
that
poor thing.
it really did feel like pottage weather. Like, I'm gonna try that gruel of almonds, and I sucked that down. That bowl of pottage just hit the spot. It was so good. So I think it's a food that you can do for your persona pretty much regardless of where you are, what your time period, what your area, your country, your socioeconomic status. I'm pretty sure that everybody was eating porridge of some measure. Yes, ma'am. You wanna come say hello?
Is there a
This is my
cat?
friend
Oh.
Allison, whose house I came to stay with since my power went out. Oops, here, I gotta have to get away with my, let me get rid of my.
And she's disappearing. Poof.
I know, I'm gonna get rid of my virtual background so she doesn't disappear into the background. There we go. There she is. And she found out we were talking about porridge. She said, "Can I come?" I said, "You want to talk about porridge?" And she went, "Yeah."
This porridge is too hot. This porridge
This
is
porridge
too
is too
cold.
cold. This porridge is just right. You know what story that's from?
Yes,
What story? About bears.
I know what it is, but I can't remember the name.
Goldilocks
Right.
and the Three Bears.
Right.
I have a wonderful poem that I read to my when I do Vikings in my history classes that's called Three Bears Gruff, and it's written from the point of view of the bears, and it talks about how she's the lawbreaker and has no respect for hospitality, and
I've read that.
and they call it oat slop. Who has eaten my oat slop? So yes, we get a lot of porridge in different nursery rhymes. What's the one that's the curds and whey? Does that mention porridge at all? I mean, that's just a milk curds and
Little
whey.
Miss Muffet sat on a
Little Miss
tuffet.
Eating her curds away. Along came a spider and sat down beside her and frightened Miss Muffet away. I guess it doesn't mention.
And what's a spider gonna do with cottage cheese? For goodness sakes!
Seriously, God, it's gotta do.
They eat a lot of things.
Significant
That's not one of them.
difference between porridge and pottage? That's an excellent question. I think that pottage usually refers to something that has vegetables in it. Not necessarily. It bleeds over a lot, I think, depending on where you are and what country and what time period. You like that? The smell of that? That's the spice blend I made in my last class. I'm still grinding it. Yeah, that's okay. You can work that mortar and pestle. Porridge is usually more grain, and pottage is usually more vegetable. But yeah, what was the sour stuff in the original?
It doesn't say.
It just says
Sour
sour
stuff in
stuff.
Spanish cuisine could be the juice of sour oranges, but I've also seen vinegar and the juice of sour pomegranates. And I'm not sure if verjuice shows up, the juice of sour grapes.
Well,
So
they've
the
got, yeah, they certainly grow grapes in Spain, so that strikes me as being
So here are the
likely.
definitions that I've got. Porridge, heated or boiled, ground, crushed, or chopped starchy plants, typically grain in milk or water. Pottage, a thick soup or stew made from boiled vegetables, grains, and if available, meat or fish. Pottage gardens grown in France are the name because they provided the means to make the dish. The word, let me pull up my article real quick. The common root of the word actually comes from a couple of different places. Smells good. The more you grind, the more smell that comes out of that, huh? The words porridge, pottage, potage, puree, and pora all stem from the common words in Latin porum or porus, which mean a leek, which tells you that leeks would be part of a pottage as well, or pulse, which means legumes, and poultice and poltos in Greek. Some trace the name in the Low Countries, in Holland and places like that. The word are closer to the name of the pot that it's made in. And in Scotland, you use a spurtle to stir it. In Ireland, you call it a stirabout. And in every hearth fire in the world, it represents warmth and comfort. So is there a difference? Probably, depending on who you talk to and where you are, but no, really. I mean, the biggest difference comes when you look at cultures who take the porridge and then put it on a hot stone to bake it, and you end up with cakes. It's still basically porridge, but it's been baked into a cake as opposed to eaten out of a bowl with a spoon. But I mean, even then, you're still basically talking about porridge. Orange and cinnamon is a classic combination. Oh yeah, that's a good combination. I like that.
It sounds like it's kind of a continuum.
I think you would like a bowl of oatmeal that tasted like orange and cinnamon. Yeah, we could try that. We could try orange and cinnamon oatmeal.
What were you asking, Adelwolf?
I was just sort of commenting that it sort of sounds like it's a continuum between how many pulses and how many leeks you can use and where do you fall upon the line, puts you on the porridge or pottage, depending on which culture you're working with and how big of a music is compared to.
I think that's us trying to draw the line. I don't know that they would have. I think it would have been porridge or pottage depending on your cultural usage. But I think it would change enough with what was in the garden and what was available. I mean, you have meat in the fall. So there was probably going to be meat in your porridge in the fall and no meat in the wintertime. So it would, what was in what you're calling porridge or pottage was going to change. So, I mean, it would probably be, the cook calls this pottage all year round, but what goes in it changes.
Well, it's no coincidence that Lent happens when there's nothing to serve anyway. There's no meat.
There's no eggs. There's no dairy. Do your chickens produce in the middle of wintertime? There's a bunch of chickens here on the farm, and they don't produce much right now. It takes until springtime until the eggs start coming, and then when the eggs come a lot, right?
That's why Easter eggs. Yeah.
That's when her mom is like, "Wouldn't you like to take some eggs home today?" Right?
They are like Easter eggs. The chickens hide in bushes, and they have to go collect them because they hide them in bushes instead of their coop.
They go and lay eggs under the bushes.
Yep.
They do.
They just started doing that.
Do you want to tell them about the tragedy that just happened? What you just told me about? There was a chicken that died during the last class that I was here that came in and said there was a chicken that just passed away.
I'm so sorry.
Sad. So yeah, we had a chicken death in the family just a few minutes ago.
A very good chicken.
She was a good chicken. She's an older one.
I was the one. She was
few years old now. She was one of the older ones, right? So yeah. Anyway, but we digress from porridge. So anybody else? The word is agrio. Is that the sweet sour?
That's sour. That's the
Yeah, that
word
just
for
means
sour.
sour. You're
Sour.
right.
It
Okay.
means sour, and since that doesn't work well as a noun in English, I added stuff.
Sour stuff. Gotcha. Add the sour. Add the sour to it. That makes sense. The lambs are scrawny. It's true, and that's beautiful, and it smells so good.
What are you grinding?
Peppery. She is working on the powder fort that I started in the last class.
Nom, nom.
So we've got a mortar and pestle that's still got lots of chunky parts in it. Kids love mortars and pestles. Every time I ever put a mortar and pestle with spices in it out at a demo, kids cannot get enough of that. I don't know what it is, but they love it. I'm like, okay, go for it. That's a lot of hard work I don't have to do. You work that.
Their wrists still work, unlike
Yeah,
ours.
yeah, they get the upper body strength. They can work that. That's right. And I love this kind of flat mortar and pestle that Mistress Honora and Ethelmark made for me. This is great. Do you think that part of the handle works better than the rounded part? I always thought the round part was the one that was supposed to go up against the ball. But
Never heard of fonio before. Where's that from?
what now? Fonio. I don't know what that is either.
I don't know, but Juana just.
Fonio's
Oh, it's
delicious, and
African.
it's actually out of Africa. Yeah, it's a
African
really delicious little teeny tiny grain. I've started finding it at Whole Foods maybe 5-6 years ago, and looks a lot like couscous when it's cooked, but it's delicious.
So it's not the same thing as teff or millet. It's
And I didn't see any
one.
references to teff at all, but I definitely saw millet and sorghum using that from African sources. Teff is Ethiopian. Is that right?
Oh, okay. Other side.
Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe they make porridge out of. I mean, the bread that they make out of teff is basically sponge, you know. And fufu. Yep. Fufu is that? I guess that could be cooked into a porridge. And then when you
What kind of is a porridge, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And then you've got cassava and all of those gummy things that are in the New World as well. But we're kind of trying to stick to pre-17th century, not necessarily just Western Europe, but you know what was known in that time period.
How in the world did anybody even figure out cassava could be made into something you could eat?
I know,
So
because you have to cook it twice.
otherwise.
The first time it's toxic.
Fatal trial and error.
Yeah. My theory many years ago, I came up with the theory that it was a Frenchman who wanted to commit suicide, but being French, he just couldn't leave it alone. It was so terrible the first time he had to cook it again, and he discovered that he made that's my personal, completely made up bullshit theory. That
Works
it had
for
to be a
me.
Frenchman.
I'm quite fond of
This
the
is so
oyster
terrible.
theory.
I must cook it again, and then he comes up with tapioca. Like it becomes
Easier
a thing.
to figure out cassava than it is to figure out tofu.
It's true.
Tofu is just
A
you know,
series of very
Coagulated
gross
soy
bets.
milk.
but they already had cheese, okay? You know, and
It's
if
a
you have
series
cheese
of
and you
very-
have if you
a
have
series of
cheese and
very
you have
gross bets.
soy milk, putting the two together, it really makes a lot of sense, actually.
I've always
I
kind of
tofu
classified it
once.
under oysters. Like at some point in human history, somebody decided to crack open a rock and say, I'm gonna eat the slimy bit.
The oysters, I think that was from watching birds. I think they
Birds
figured
or
out
otters or some
some
animal.
animal was
case.
opening the oysters and they figured that out. That one I get. The tapioca, I have thought, okay, can't be doing that because that makes a lot of noise. I know it's tempting because you still got the big chunky bits and you really want those long pepper bits. Got to get in there and chunk them up. You're making a lot of noise hammering on the spices. You can grind, but you can't hammer.
My money is on otters.
Yeah, could be. Adolescent boys going, that's gross, I dare you to eat it. Well, you know, adolescent boys probably haven't changed much. All right, you gotta make less noise with this. And you're also kind of making a mess. You're going outside here. You can't be throwing all our hard ground spices out on the table. Sniff. Sniff. I don't want to put it up my nose. Oh, and I think it's important to say that porridge is not a breakfast food necessarily. I mean, it would be eaten throughout the day. It might be your food. It might be what food was that day, was what was in the porridge pot, what was able to be gleaned from the winter garden, for example. There's probably not a lot of other food happening right then. So a savory one in the evening, you know, those are nutmegs.
Christianna, can you talk about pot herbs and pottage vegetables?
Yes. Hold on just a second.
Well, especially in the spring, you know, the spring tonic herbs that are just sprouting out of the ground is supposed
Okay,
to wake
so
you up.
here's my list that I took from the there it is, from the Tudor Monastery Farm, right? The show we've been talking about. Where is it? That's not it. Okay, so in the spring, no, in the winter, you've got 6 weeks of fasting. So you're not eating meat, milk, butter, or eggs. In the garden, you've got cabbage and kale. Now, this is Tudor England in the 15th century. Cabbage and kale stems, green cabbage shoots, winter savory, leeks, parsley, Alexanders, also known as horse parsley or black lovage, and primrose flowers. In the stores, you've got dried beans, dried peas, oats, barley, rye, wheat, salted and pickled fish. So that's going to make up what's in your pottage, right? Cabbage, winter savory, some leeks, the Alexanders, peas and beans. You have all those things in winter during that Lenten fasting time. In the spring, in your garden, you've got just some small new growth showing along with edible weeds such as dandelion, nettles, fat hen, fat sow, land cress, and thistle. So all of those are going to end up in your pottage. In spring, your livestock, the cows and sheep, give birth, start producing milk. So there's fresh milk, sweet butter, soft cheeses available, and poultry begin to lay eggs. The supplies of dried peas and beans are very low. In the summertime, the garden is producing oric, good King Henry, strawberries, raspberries, root vegetables such as parsnips, turnips, skirrets, and carrots, fresh green peas and leafy greens from turnip, cabbage, kale, beet, and rocket, and summertime fruits. In the summertime, June is the height of egg production. Butter and cream are abundant. Dairy production shifts to salted butter and hard cheeses to be added to the stores. So your fresh and soft cheeses are no longer being made in the summertime. Plentiful meats at this time include beef, fresh eels, mackerel, salmon, trout, mutton, and poultry. In the stores, they're almost completely depleted, and that led to the summer hunger for the poor. The first bean and pea harvests didn't show up until the end of July, so actually summertime feels like it should be this time of abundance, but until those harvests started coming in, it was actually a time of starvation for many of the poorer folks. In autumn, the garden would be grain harvest with lots of baked goods, breads, pies, pastries, cakes, with onions, leeks, turnips, cabbages, apples, and pears coming in. Livestock, the egg production starts falling off and cows stop producing milk. It's slaughtering season, so beef is at its cheapest. You've got ham, bacon, and sausages being made, dried and smoked to be added to the stores. Offal is eaten while fresh, and meats are pickled. In the stores, you're putting up ale, preserved meats and fishes, salt cod, hard cheeses, and dried fruits. When it comes to Christmas time, you've got Advent, 4 weeks of fasting, so no meat, but eggs and dairy are allowed if they're available. In the stores, you've got herring, salted fish, root vegetables, salted butter, and honey. Christmas, you've got porridges, puddings, and cakes made with dried fruits and expensive exotic spices. And from Christmas until Lent, you've got in your stores bacon, ham, sausages, hard cheeses, salted butter, dried fruits, and root vegetables that you're going to be eating up until it's time to start the cycle over with Lent. So that's the Tudor Monastery Farm Garden season by season. That kind of shows you what would be in the porridge bowl each season as you went through the year.
That's interesting.
The next level of pranking had to be convincing each other what was an aphrodisiac. Oh, oysters.
I was following up on Elizabeth.
On the oyster type, right? It's like, what part of that was an aphrodisiac?
Well, oysters are supposed to be. And going,
Just
first they
be-
convince each other to eat them, and then they convince them you have to eat lots of them because it'll make them
Casanova
attractive
ate
to women.
like 90 a day for breakfast. And he was a world famous lover, so who knows?
I think that's part of the legend. I'm not sure that really
No
happened.
peas in early summer. Yes, the green peas in early summer, and then the dried peas are later in the year. Yeah.
Well, the dried peas you had, if you had any left, they'd be
If
a
there were
year
any
old.
left, but generally those would have been eaten up during that Lenten period when you had no meat. So you're eating
Right.
the dried peas.
Did they eat the green peas green, or did they just dry them
They
into dry?
did. In fact, there's lots of recipes for like peas with mint and peas in salads, and yeah, so they
Yeah.
did eat the green peas. Let's see when the peas come in. Fresh green peas in summertime, early in the summertime when the pea harvest they talk about coming in July. So the fresh green peas maybe June, and then when you start to harvest them and get the dried peas is as late as July.
And there's no mention of them using green onions in the spring pottages.
There were
They're the-
leeks.
Sure, leeks and rocket and not rocket. What's the word I'm looking for?
Scallion.
Rapunzels.
I know leeks aren't ready until later, but green onions, or they're not called spring onions for nothing.
Right.
Says the lady who's teaching the onion class tomorrow.
That's true. And you can ask that question in that class. When would the onions be coming up? I mean, I know that onions are harvested later in the summer, and you've got the ones that you've got in your pantry or your store, you know, if you've got them left over. But yeah, I mean, green onions are sprouting all over my lawn right now. So if they're there, you're going to eat them.
You've also got spring leeks and wild leeks and stuff like that. So
Wild
yeah.
garlic. All those different varieties of the alliums that come up. And I think it's important to talk about the wild herbs, the herbs that would be allowed to grow in a garden while something else was allowed to establish itself so that you had something to eat. It might not be the desired crop, but it was something. And so encouraging those weeds to grow and not necessarily weeding things. I think ramps are North American, aren't they? I associate those with Appalachian. I'm not aware of those as a European food. Maybe somebody could correct me if I'm wrong.
I'm on it.
Okay.
Yeah, I've only ever heard of them in North America, but they're probably some sort of European.
Something similar. I mean, I got onion sprouts. They're big onion bulbs with like green onion sprouts on them.
Yeah.
They're basically the same idea,
Yeah, North American species of wild onion, but they're similar to Allium ursinum, which is native to Europe
Egyptian
and
onions.
Asia.
Those are the ones that bend over and touch the ground and then root themselves and then grow up again. Those are the walking onions. Those are called Egyptian onions.
See, I love that mental image.
You can almost hear one of the Merry Melodies cartoons with that going, right?
Yep.
But I mean, when you think about the original name being a Latin word for leek, it definitely tells you the importance of the alliums in the average porridge, Now, maybe if it's all grain, not so much, but certainly for pottage. And then when I make Potherbs, I like a nice collection. I use turnip greens and leeks and onions and garlic. I use lots of different types of greens and put them all together and then cook them with malt vinegar and things like that. So that's my version of Potherbs, is just what's growing in the garden. Let's throw it all in the pot together and cook it up as a mess. I had something about mess. Hold on.
Mess it forth. Well, it sounds like moose from the German.
Mess.
You know, I had ramps crossed up with rampion, which is another a green used like spinach,
Mm-hmm.
aka Rapunzel. Hello,
Yeah.
that's where that came from.
Right.
A turnip relative. Rampion and turnip.
Oh, it was after the Esau. That's what it was. It was after that quote. Sorry, I'm just trying to find it. Oh, there it is. A mess of pottage is something immediately attractive but of little value, taken foolishly and carelessly in exchange for something more distant and perhaps less tangible but immensely more valuable. So I guess that's a saying derived from the story of Esau and Jacob in the pottage. A mess of pottage, but a mess usually refers to a batch of something. You make a mess of porridge.
It's also in medieval dining, a mess would be a bowl of food that meant to serve 4 to what is it, 4 to 8 people, Selene?
Yeah, well, now we're tying in with a military and specifically a naval tradition of the mess. You know, it's a group of people who eat together and make their food together. So you mess it forth in
Right.
smaller portions.
Right. Right. Yeah. So I think alternately talking about the stuff, the size of the stuff, the serving of the stuff, and the bowl that it's in. Linguistic drift is definitely a big thing in this whole discussion, because between the pottage, porridge, potage, and in French, potage means soup, specifically horrible soup, as opposed to a gruel or something thicker, but it's all derived from the same word. So that kind of tells you that it definitely transformed itself across different cultural lines. Any records of dried and powdered alliums? I have not seen any, but
dried, yes. Powdered, hard to say.
I mean, we talked about this a little bit in the previous class in medieval flavors, that you wouldn't keep things powdered. Once it's powdered, it starts losing its flavor almost immediately. So you might powder something that you had dried on the shelf, but would you have it powdered? I mean, I know personally onion powder clumps like crazy. So it's not something that I would want to keep on hand. I would want to do it myself if I needed it, I would think.
Yeah, dried onions are useful, and but they're pieces of onion. They're not, it's not.
Allium ursinium, also called ramps, unknown to me. That's not one I'm familiar with.
We just had that conversation.
Oh, about the well, no. The comment is I thought allium ursinum were also called ramps.
Were they? I don't know. We would have to look that up.
I don't know. It's a good question. We have a class on onions tomorrow, right? These are all great questions for that one.
And I better find out the answers before tomorrow.
Oh, are you teaching that class?
Yes, she is.
Okay, well, make notes.
Yes, I am.
Make notes, yeah, because these are really good questions, and there are many rabbit holes to go down. Like I said, I had to stop myself and go, no.
Yes.
I cannot.
Oh, you know what? These are
dive down that rabbit hole today.
The bear leak was also Ram Sons, not Ramps.
So we're playing Stump the Onion Lady. Nice. Nice.
Nice.
Good. Onion Lady, that's awesome. That's okay. Because one of my former proteges was calling me Pottage Queen last night, so. So it's better than French toast laurel. It just so happened that the day they announced my laurel, I had an entry in our Kingdom Arts and Sciences about the evolution of French toast, lost bread to French toast. And it had nothing to do, the discussion had already happened, the announcement was made, it had nothing to do with the fact that I had put that particular thing out. Because the announcement happened at that event, the French toast laurel kind of stuck for a while. Said, I don't know, I think I like Pottage Queen better, but And I have taught class on breakfast when I came out to West Coast Culinary Symposium I definitely seem to gravitate towards the breakfast, which it wasn't a meal. I mean, they didn't eat breakfast the way we eat it. So
You
back
break
to
fast with
yeah,
whatever's
to
there,
break
you
the
know?
fast with your pottage. Yeah, exactly. Regardless of what time of the day that would have been. It might be your only meal. So yes, it could be your breakfast. It was my breakfast this morning. It was Selene's breakfast this morning, as a matter of fact. I
It
have to
was.
admit. Very different. Both of our pottages were very different, but nevertheless.
It's what we had, you know. It's
It's
what
what we
was in the
had.
house.
And since
that's
my house
the
was
essence of
cold
it.
and had no heat, and I was very happy to have a bowl of lovely pottage for breakfast this morning.
Nobody here will admit to having turned off the Instant Pot heater overnight, and I got really mad.
I just used. I actually made a comment yesterday and deleted it because I didn't want it to come across that I was being know-it-all. But I took exception to somebody's video where they were using modern grinding methods. They were using a mini food processor and they were using rolled oats. And I was like, I mean, I'm not opposed to using shortcuts, but you're messing with the textures here. And I think
Well, that's it. You know, that was a step too far.
When you're talking about such a simple food as a simple grain and some kind of milk or almond milk or whatever, just a 2-ingredient dish, then the texture is pretty important because that's going to be a major component in that food. What was produced looked delicious. I just think that it didn't look like it would be the right texture for what was put in.
You didn't have rolled oats until a lot later, you know.
No, that's 19th century. That's steam powered machines that make rolled oats. So we're talking groats, whole groats, or cracked oats. I could take whole groats and put them in a mortar and pestle like this and crunch them up before throwing them.
In a world where steel cut oats are right there on the shelf next to the regular Quaker oats, there's really no excuse for that.
Well, that's true. That's true. And the oats that I used this morning were rolled oats. So,
well, but that's not a problem. You're not reporting. You're not putting it on YouTube.
They were gluten-free rolled oats. So that's what I.
That's important.
And I had an idea that speed was an issue this morning. I didn't realize that I was going to have power for like 20 minutes, and that was the 20 minutes in which I made my porridge this morning. So. No, I didn't have, because I lit my gas stove with a lighter, so I made it when I didn't have any power, as a matter of fact. Now that I think about it, that's right. I had to grab the lighter out of the drawer to light the stove.
Well, you've certainly gone above and beyond to be here today, and I gotta tell you, I am extremely grateful. Because I had the notes, I could have started talking, but lecturing makes me very nervous.
That's okay. That's all right. I don't mind talking. That's what I do. Talking about food.
I want to be a sidekick. You know, I don't want to be the hero. I want to be the sidekick.
You were the plucky demo girl with the
That's it.
Stunt porridge.
Empty bowl now.
Porridge, and you ate all your porridge. You got
I
down
did
to
eat
the
all my
bottom of the
porridge.
bowl. What a good girl you are. And that brings us to the top of the hour. So see, we were able to talk about porridge for a whole hour. You doubted.
This was fun, guys. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Good luck on it. I wish I could say I would come to your onion class tomorrow, but I'm teaching another class here from my country estate, so I will be.
Oh well.
I'll be busy with that, but I plan on, and I missed everything prior to this today too. But I do definitely plan on catching up to stuff on the videos. So